Hello everyone! Some of you seem to be interested in the Tinysizer Modular Synthesizer, which I use in some of my Modular Synth Jam videos. So here is an overview and a demo of that neat and really tiny synthesizer. To see how tiny it actually is, here is my medium-sized hand and also some measurements. Looking at the front panel, there are 42 potentiometers or knobs to control various parameters, and there are over 100 little patch points which you connect with small patch leads, 40 of which come with the Tinysizer when you buy it. Then we have the on and off switch over here, a MIDI indicator lamp which blinks when MIDI data is received, a power LED, and also a BNC lamp socket for the lamp, which is also provided with the Tinysizer and which is really useful when you play in a dark spot. The Tinysizer also comes with a sturdy VESA mount monitor stand, which you can use to prop the Tinysizer up or angle it so that you can reach it comfortably. And it also comes with a power supply, of course. Let's look at the right side of the Tinysizer. Here we have a MIDI in socket, which receives MIDI data from a keyboard or a sequencer or your DAW. And then there is a MIDI through port, which just forwards that MIDI data out so you can daisy chain another few devices after the Tinysizer. And below that we have a MIDI learn button. You just press it and then hit a key on your keyboard, and it will take that key on that channel as your lowest note for the MIDI interface. There's also a free software you can download to configure the MIDI interface further. Next up, there are 5 auxiliary ports. They are 1/4-inch TRS sockets, so you can use stereo jacks to connect other analog equipment. The cool thing is that you can actually route signals to the tip or the sleeve connection only, so it will give you a total of 10 input or output ports. After the 5 auxiliary ports, we have another 1/4-inch socket, which is hardwired to the VCA4 of the Tinysizer. So you don't have to use an auxiliary port to send the audio out of the Tinysizer, but you can just patch your final signal into the VCA4 input, and it will come out of the VCA4 output on the right side. Now, looking at the left side, there are 2 toggle switches which control the range of LFO1 and LFO2. Back to the front panel, let me just list all of the features of the Tinysizer so you can get an idea what it comes with. It has 2 VCOs with pulse width modulation and frequency modulation. There are pulse and saw wave outputs, there are sub-oscillators, and there's also a waveform processor for voltage-controlled distortion. There are 2 separate slew generators. There are 3 LFOs. The first 2 have a knob for pulse width or ramp shape, so you can have triangle waves, you can have sawtooth waves or ramp waves, and various pulse width pulse waves. They also feature inverted outputs and a sync input. The third LFO is frequency modulatable and offers a triangle wave and a square output. Then we have a voltage-controlled filter with an included mixer. It has 4 audio inputs, 2 of which can be attenuated. It of course features cutoff frequency inputs. You can modulate the resonance, and it has low-pass, band-pass and high-pass output. Then there are 2 ADSR envelope generators. One is slow, one is fast, and there are 4 VCAs. But of course that's not all. We also have a ring modulator, a sample and hold section. We have a white noise output and a pink noise output. We have a separate 2-input mixer, which also can act as 2 attenuators. And then there is even a digital effect section, which features a digital delay and a digital reverb. And even that is not all, no, but we also have an audio gate and envelope follower. So you could connect a guitar, for example, and it would generate an envelope CV signal from the guitar sounds. You can amplify the guitar and just mix it in with the other sounds, and you can also set a threshold over which the volume of the guitar has to get to generate a gate signal from that. And there's the MIDI to CV interface, which will convert MIDI data into up to 6 different gate signals and 4 different CV signals. So as you can see, there are a ton of features in there. And I'm really surprised every time I play with a Tinysizer at how much I can get out of that really tiny machine. So let's take a look at the patch points of the Tinysizer, which are connected using tiny patch leads, which are usually used for prototyping electronics. You definitely need some precision when patching them, but I never really found it to be difficult. And you learn the patch point layout very quickly, in my opinion. it's also very well labeled. For example, let's look at the filter section here. On the left we have 4 audio inputs, and we can see that they are inputs because there are little arrows pointing towards the socket, which mean that a signal goes into the socket. On the audio inputs 1 and 2, there is also a little P, which stands for potentiometer, or knob, which indicates that there is a knob to attenuate the signal for this input. On the right side we have the low pass, band pass and high pass outputs, which have little arrows pointing away from the sockets, which indicate an output. For each output there are actually 4 sockets, so we almost never need a multiple because we already have 4 outputs of the same thing, which is really handy. Okay, let's do some patching. And we actually have to do some patching because being a modular synthesizer and not a semi-modular synthesizer, it means that the Tinysizer won't make any sound unless we patch something. So let us start by just patching the pulse wave output of VCO1 into the VCA4 input, which is hardwired to the VCA4 quarter-inch output on the right side, which I connected to my recorder. I'm just patching a small patch lead into the pulse wave output, and I'll patch it into the VCA4 input. And now I can just use the gain knob of VCA4 to control the output volume of the Tinysizer. And let's just have a look at the range of the VCO1. We have a coarse and a fine-tune knob. And we can also set the pulse width. Alright, let's turn on the gain again. And let's listen to the sawtooth wave. I'll just unplug the pulse patch point and plug the sawtooth output into the VCA4. Now let's add VCO2, which features sub-oscillators as well as the regular pulse and sawtooth oscillators. So I'll patch our sawtooth from VCO1 into the mixer input 1, and I'll patch the sub-oscillator 1, which stands for 1 octave below, into the mixer input 2. And then I'll use a small patch lead to connect the mixer output into the VCA4 input. Now the mixer has 2 potentiometers, one to attenuate the input 1 and one to attenuate the input 2. So if I increase the volume of input 1, we hear the sawtooth wave from VCO1, and on mixer input 2 we have the sub-oscillator 1 of VCO2. Let's unpatch the first VCO and patch the second VCO's sawtooth wave output into mixer input 1. So like this we can hear the sawtooth of VCO2 and the first sub-oscillator. And now the second sub-oscillator and the third sub-oscillator. It just goes 1 octave lower for each oscillator. And if we disconnect the sawtooth wave and connect the pulse wave, we of course also have pulse width modulation. Okay, now let's go ahead and check out the filter. So I'll unplug the mixer inputs and just plug the sawtooth output into the audio 1 input of the mixer, which has an attenuator knob here, which I'll turn down. And then the sub-oscillator 3 goes into audio input 2, which I also turn down. And then I'll go from the low pass output directly into VCA4. And let's turn the cutoff frequency down and the resonance down. And then I'll just turn up the gain of VCA4 and increase the cutoff frequency. And now with a little bit of resonance. And with more resonance. And now let's turn the resonance up completely. And let's turn the gain a little lower, because it's starting to self-oscillate. Let's turn down the audio inputs to just hear the filter's self-oscillation. And now with the added audio inputs. Alright, another thing I like about the Tinysizer is that you can unpatch it really quickly. You just go in there with your fingers and you just pull out the cables. And now you can start off from scratch again. So next, let us listen to the ring modulator. I'll patch sawtooth output of VCO1 into the X input, and I'll patch the sawtooth output of VCO2 into the Y input of the ring modulator. And the output of the ring modulator goes into the VCA4 input again. Let's turn up the gain and play with the frequencies. Use the second VCO's pulse output for the Y signal. Okay, let's unpatch it again. And let's listen to the noise. This is the white noise going directly into VCA4. And this is the pink noise. The pink noise is a little duller, which is sometimes nice to use as a sample and hold input source. And while on topic of the sample and hold, let's just try that out. I'll just patch the pink noise into the sample and hold input, and then I'll patch the trigger input to the first LFO's pulse output, and the sample and hold output goes into the 1 volt per octave input of VCO1. And then I'll patch the pulse wave output of VCO1 just directly into the VCA4 so that you can listen to it. And now by adjusting the speed of LFO1, we can speed up the sequence. So yeah, that's just a typical sample and hold application. Let's unpatch it again. Okay, let's check out the envelope generators. I'll patch the pulse wave output of LFO1 into the gate input of envelope 1. And then I'll patch the sub-oscillator output of VCO2 into VCA1. And then use a small patch lead to connect the envelope output of envelope 1 to the VCA-CV input of VCA1. And then the VCA out goes into the VCA4 input again. make the LFO1 slower so that the envelope is triggered less frequently. And using the shape knob of LFO1, we can control the pulse width of the pulse wave output. So this will give us just a small sustain envelope, and this will hold the sustain longer because we increase the pulse width of the gate signal. So yeah, this is a typical ADSR envelope, of which we have 2 in the Tinysizer. This was the slow one, and there's also a faster one. Now let's look at the LFOs again. And for that, I'll just patch the sub-oscillator 1 into the filter, and the filter's low-pass output goes into VCA4's input. And now I'll use the ramp output of LFO1 and patch it into the cutoff frequency input of the filter. And let's turn the cutoff frequency down completely and turn the cutoff frequency CV knob up. And now the LFO shape is at the middle, so which means it's a triangle, which we can hear. And now we can change the shape. Okay, now let's try out LFO3, because LFO3 can be frequency modulated. So I'll patch the triangle output of LFO3 into the cutoff frequency, and then let's just turn it up and see what it sounds like. Okay, that's just a simple triangle. But let's use the slow LFO1's pulse output and patch it into the frequency modulation input. So now every time the pulse is high of LFO1, the frequency or the speed of LFO3 increases. And we can attenuate that, of course, for some rhythmic patterns, for example. LFOs 1 and 2 can also be synced, by the way. So you can either sync it to a gate signal coming from the MIDI interface, or you can sync it to another LFO. So yeah, there are lots of possibilities to create some rhythmic LFO patterns. Okay, now let's connect an external keyboard to the Tinysizer to play melodies. I'm using the MicroBrute's keyboard, and I will connect it using control voltages and using the first auxiliary input of the Tinysizer. To do this, I'll use a splitter cable or a Y cable, which has one stereo jack on one side, which is 1/4 inch, and there are two 1/8 inch mono jacks on the other side. Now this one's actually a stereo jack as well, but I only had a stereo jack left, so I used that, but only the tip and the sleeve are connected. So I will plug the stereo jack into auxiliary port 1, and then the tip will be connected to the gate output of the MicroBrute keyboard, and the sleeve will be connected to the pitch output of the MicroBrute keyboard. So to connect those signals, I will use the tip connector of the auxiliary port 1 and route that into the envelope gate in. And for the pitch, I will use the ring connector to auxiliary 1 and put that into the volt per octave input of the first oscillator. Then I'll patch the sawtooth output of the first oscillator into the VCA1 input, and from the VCA1 output into our VCA4, which is connected to the recorder. And then I'll use the envelope output CV to control the VCA1. And now if I play something, we can hear melody. Of course I can still tune the VCO. And add a little release time. I think now's a good time to check out the effects section of the Tinysizer. We have a digital delay and a digital reverb. I'll patch the VCA1 output into the effects audio input. And there we have two audio outputs, so we can use it as a stereo effect as well. But for now, let's just use it as a mono effect. And I will patch channel 1 output into the first mixer input. Because from the effects output, the signal is completely wet all the time. So to mix it with a dry signal, I will just use the mixer and patch the VCA output into mixer input 2. So now we have on mixer input 1 the wet effect and on mixer input 2 the dry sound. And then the mixer output goes into VCA 4 again. Now let's listen to a mix of both. And I just turned the balance knob in the effect section to delay, because you can actually blend between delay and reverb, or just have one of them sound. So now we're at the delay section. And this is with a very fast delay. And this is with the slowest delay time of approximately 1000 milliseconds. And now let's decrease that delay time. And blend a little reverb in there. And in the reverb section, we also have a time knob with which we can control the reverb time. Let's turn the balance to reverb only. And this is with very short reverb time. And this is with the longest reverb time. And now let's blend over to the delay a little bit. Yeah, I think that those effects are definitely usable. Of course, they are digital and not analog, but yeah, I think they just round off the feature package of the Tinysizer really well and can give the sound a lot more depth. And yeah, I welcome having them in the Tinysizer. Okay, now that we already have something patched up here, let's just continue with that patch and route the second VCOs sub-oscillator output into the audio input 2 of the filter. And then route the first VCO sawtooth wave output into the first audio input of the filter, and the low pass output into our VCA, which is controlled by the gate signal. And so now we should hear two sounds playing at the same time when I press a key. And of course I have to turn up the mixer. I'll just turn up the dry signal. And as of now, only the first VCO gets the 1 volt per octave pitch signal. So let's just change that and also patch the signal into the second VCO's 1 volt per octave input. Okay, now let's add LFO1's ramp output into the cutoff frequency input of the filter to get some modulation in there. Let's make it a little faster. And now let's add LFOs. LFO2's ramp output into the resonance input of the filter. And with a little bit of effects. And of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You can do a lot more with the Tinysizer. There are still lots of unused patch points and unused cables. So yeah, if you have any questions, write them below this video in the comments. And I'll just play around with the Tinysizer a little bit more. And here are also a few links to my videos where you can hear the Tinysizer in action. So thanks a lot for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more videos. And see you next time. Bye.